Trevor Rayne from the Revolutionary Communist Group. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for supporting our channel today.
I'm pleased to be here. Hello.
Thank you. How did you originally learn about the Kurds and about their struggle for freedom?
Well, I was studying in the School of Oriental and African Studies in the 1970s, mid-1970s, and I came across a fellow student who had got a scar on the side of his face. And I asked him how he got it and who he was, and whatever. And he told me he was an Iranian Kurd. And I didn't mean much to me, but, he told me a little bit about the Kurds. And at that time, the British Army were in Iran training and working with the Iranian secret police, SAVAK. And a few of the British soldiers were killed by the Kurdish Fedayeen. So I learned a bit. And then in the 1970s and early 80s, we as a group worked very much on Ireland and, solidarity with the Irish struggle. So we studied Marx and Engels and Lenin on the right of nations to self-determination. So we had a sort of theoretical background. And in the 1980s, we held with City of London anti-apartheid group a non-stop picket of the South African embassy. It went on for 4 years and more, non-stop, for the release of Mandela and all South African political prisoners. And while we were there, we encountered a German woman, a couple of German women actually, who told us more about the Kurdish struggle. And so we ran articles by them in the paper. And subsequently, I engaged with the Kurdish community, which had begun to arrive more and more in London. And I met Hatip Dicle and Kani Yilmaz and Estella. And we began to work and publish articles on Kurdistan and the struggle. Yeah.
So, can you comment about the history of Britain's relationship to the Kurds, and why you think it is important for people in Britain to learn about support the Kurdish movement?
Well, people in Britain or the British state has a particular historical and moral responsibility for the fate of the Kurdish people, as it does the Palestinians. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was drawn up secretly between Britain and France in 1916, planning to, carve up the Middle East between them. In the Cairo conference, which was held in March 1921, presided over by the British Colonial Secretary, Winston Churchill, they basically drew up, the borders of what was to be the Middle Eastern countries at that conference. And initially, Churchill supported a Kurdish sort of mini-state as a buffer against Turkey and Russia, the Bolsheviks. But, they dropped that quite quickly. Part of the reasons was costs, and later, the alliance with the Turkish Ataturk against the Soviet Union, and they dropped any commitment to the Kurds, and the Kurds were simply excluded at the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. Very quickly, the Kurds resisted in Iraq, and one of the first uses of poison gas was by the RAF bombing Kurdish villages in the early 1920s. And it's worth saying this was done under both, Conservative and the first Labour government, which came in, I think, in 1924. They were bombing it, the Kurds, into submission, basically. Kurds rebelled in Iran. You might know of the Mahabad Republic, 1946 to 47, and like along with the Azerbaijanis, and it was the first occasion after the bombing of atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, August 1945, was in 1946-47. Harry Truman, president of the US, made the first threat after that to use the atomic bomb on the Red Army if they did not pull away and from those areas where the Mahabad Republic was established. And it was ultimately crushed by the Iranian forces. The leaders was hung, and it was backed very much by senior British Army officers. I've told you about the British being in Iran, helping Savak, and Halabja, 1988, 16th of March, the terrible gassing of thousands of Kurds. And when it was revealed that the British had sold Iraq the ingredients for the chemical weapon, the British Secretary of Trade, Alan Clark, told the BBC programme Moral Maze, well, the Kurds don't vote for me. And that was about the moral stance of the British state, the British government at that time. I just want to say something about a particular responsibility, and that was on the 24th of March 1992, on reflection, Abdullah Ocalan had pointed out, he'd said that the conspiracy to have him kidnapped and abducted was hatched in London. Well, on the 24th of March 1992, the Kurds in London were protesting outside the Turkish embassy against another massacre of their people by Turkish state forces. And they were attacked by dogs, police dogs and Metropolitan Police. 30 or so were injured. People were arrested. And on that very day, the Turkish chief of staff, Dogan Güneş, was in London. That's when the plot was being hatched, I do believe. The British Labour government in 2001 banned the PKK 2001 as a terrorist organization, and the European Union followed afterwards, after that banning. So we have a particular responsibility in Britain for what has happened right down to today.
You partly answered that question as well, but I would like to go for that as well. So what is your comments about Britain's relationship with Turkey?
Today, Britain is in a very big, the British capitalists, the British ruling class and its state are in a difficult position, as they leave Brexit. They are looking for trade deals, and in particular, Theresa May struck up a couple of years ago a military deal on behalf of British Aerospace, BAE Systems it's called, to supply weapons and develop a fighter jet, but also amphibious craft, military seaborne, landborne as well, vehicles with Turkey. And since the 2016 failed coup, arms sales from Britain to Turkey have increased very significantly. They're running in recent years at over £1 billion worth. I mean, that's one relationship. So diplomatically, Britain, has supported Turkey. There are forces within the European Union. There are countries in the European Union that have shown more hesitancy about backing Turkey. As yet, the British government has remained quite loyal in its alliance with Erdogan and the Turkish government. One point I would make is this, and it's significant, that in the course of the next year, Turkey and the Turkish government have to repay approximately $180 billion, which they owe. And they are running out of foreign currency and gold reserves. They have run into problems with city fund managers pulling money out, having nothing to do with Turkey, at precisely the time that Turkey needs money, needs loans. Its credit rating is under threat. In other words, it could be relegated, its credit status, which would make the cost of borrowing and the ability to borrow for Turkey that much more difficult. Turkey in particular needs tourists at the moment to help rebuild those foreign currency reserves. And I would, tell British people who are thinking of going to Turkey, don't. Yeah. And also warn them that the Turkish Medical Association has said that the Turkish state is under-recording the cases of COVID-19 and deaths from COVID-19. I think that's important.
Yeah. How do you assess the current state of the liberation movement and in particular the more recent developments in Turkey?
I think, the Kurdish liberation struggle has shown great adaptability, great flexibility. How on earth has it managed to survive? It couldn't have done it without great ingenuity and creativity. And it has advanced on different fronts. And as it has advanced, we've seen this absolute attack on democracy in Turkey. The rounding up of politicians, Kurdish and others, trade unionists, as well as journalists, a record number of journalists imprisoned. It's appalling. You've seen academics, sacked right, left, and center. The Kurdish struggle, is critical, absolutely critical for the future, not just of Turkey, but the whole of the Middle East. Yeah, each one of those states, Turkey, Syria, Iran, and Iraq, were established on the basis, in part, of the oppression of the Kurdish people. Any advance for democracy in the region depends upon, in part, the advance of the Kurds and their right to self-determination and democracy and peace for Kurds.
Very briefly, how can the Kurdish freedom movement deal with the prejudice that surrounds being labeled as a terrorist organization?
We've seen some advance in Belgian courts. The Kurdish people, have won many fans, many supporters around the world. That's important. And by, their resistance against ISIS terrorists, I would suggest, reach out where people are in struggle, go to them, explain your case, explain our case. I don't view it as your case, it's our case. Yeah. And, the Black Lives Matter movement, people there will listen. Yeah. People need to be educated about what the Kurds have achieved and what they have achieved also, if you like, theoretically and in terms of their understanding of history, democracy, socialism, and the fight against what you call capitalist modernity and I would call imperialism, but it's the same thing in substance.
Mr. Ocalan is under isolation last 21 years now, and he's not in his basic human rights. So what do you think Turkish state aimed by isolating Mr. Abdullah Ocalan?
I'm pleased to say that I met Abdullah Ocalan in 1991 with Estella, and he was a profound person. Every sentence he uttered was measured. He was also, at times humorous, very human. The advances for women's struggle, the ecology, democracy, in substance, is real gains in that part of the world. It's really quite an achievement. By imprisoning him, they wanted to break the Kurdish movement. They wanted to destroy it, to maintain the status quo. They haven't been able to do that. By maintaining him in prison, those forces like Erdogan and the others, are demonstrating that they will not yield. They won't yield rights to Kurds, because if they yield an inch, they feel they'll have to give a mile, and it would undermine them. That's the way they view it. So, they, as long as Öcalan is imprisoned in the way that he is, it demonstrates very clearly that the Kurdish forces are viewed as a threat by Erdogan, Kurds and their supporters. Democracy is seen as a threat by Erdogan. And if they negotiate with him, as he has repeatedly asked and demonstrated that he can do, it would indicate, if you like, that the path of fascism and repression is being left in Turkey. And it is key to make any shift towards democracy that there are those negotiations. Hopefully, in Britain and Europe and elsewhere in the world, we will put and exert together, with the Kurdish people and their supporters, to eventually force discussions, because there's no other solution. They cannot win a military conflict against the Kurds ultimately.
You have mentioned that on 1991 you have a meeting with Mr. Abdullah Ocalan. So would you like to give us any impression of your meeting with Mr. Ocalan, but please very short, very briefly.
Yeah, he was, like I say, profound. He was at times playful, humorous, I think. He said to me, or he said to us, like, if need be, I can live on an onion. I hoped he wouldn't have to, but maybe he is having to. He had, was very receptive to debate and discussion. And it is a real tragedy that he's not been allowed, out, to debate and discuss, because what he has to say really does need debating and discussing. I mean, obviously, he is a man worthy of respect, and the fact that he's managed to achieve what he has in prison, in terms of writing and in terms of leadership, just demonstrates that.
How would you comment on the attitude of European countries and international institutions on Turkish occupation attacks against the Kurdish land?
They try to preserve the status quo, which has served them since the First World War, and they view their alliance with Turkey in achieving that. So Turkey is still viewed as a strategic ally. The problem they have, as we now witness in the Eastern Mediterranean and in Libya, with the sort of Ottoman ambitions of Turkey to restore Ottoman state in some way, Ottoman Empire, is that it's unreliable and, can become a menace and can become more and more destabilizing to the entire Mediterranean and Middle East and North African region. And, the British and European and even US states will have to make reconsideration of their relationship. And that of Russia is also, it's ambiguous relationship that they have with Turkey. Things could change quite quickly, I think. What I would say, finally, before I finished, is Erdogan and his gang, which I view them as a gang, really, in effect, are dangerous. I found this in the bulletin of the atomic scientists. And, Erdogan himself has said, why hasn't Turkey got an atomic bomb, a nuclear bomb? Well, this is in the bulletin of the atomic scientists, and it says, you can't rule it out that he won't try and get an atomic bomb, via relations with Pakistan or wherever. Yeah. And he is a danger. Yeah. He would be considered ultimately will be considered by European, capitalist states and even Britain as potentially now turning into a threat and a liability. The Kurds must maintain their struggle, not, try and minimize your own sacrifice on the battlefields. That is difficult. We have a great responsibility in Britain and elsewhere to support the Kurdish national struggle and just, the achievements and the perspectives that you have managed to win for your people and, begin to educate actually a bit around the world. I hear Ocalan's writings are read in Argentina. Bravo. That's good.
Trevor Rayne from the Revolutionary Communist Group. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for supporting our channel today.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to help and join in. And, at the end of my meeting with Ocalan, he said, there have been great pinnacles of resistance, yeah? New peaks will arise. You, the Kurdish people, have achieved a pinnacle of resistance. New peaks are rising and you will ascend them until you get to see the land, yeah, of Kurdistan. Free, democratic, peaceful, non-sectarian, yeah, a great achievement for the world. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.